This is the hard stuff for you to do. My daughter's got a biology degree. She hated this lab. Is the thing about science is it's a lot more creative than people give it credit for. You really have to, come up with things, kind of imagine your way through a study design, and it can be very tricky. You notice the very last page has got a lot of the kind of random statements on it. You've got to base your study on one of those statements. Now, most of those statements are not hypotheses. So they're just starting points. You start with the statement and then get a hypothesis out of it. I discovered pretty quickly when I designed this lab that if I let people make up their own hypotheses, what I got was a combination of stuff that was just so simple that, like the blackboard's black, and stuff where I'm looking at it going, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. So I want to control your starting point. And so any of your tests have got to reflect one of the statements. But you still have to follow the rules. You want to focus on one variable. You want to have a hypothesis that's clearly testable. You don't want to be trying to test two things at the same time. So the phrasing of your hypothesis, very often, you can't just lift one of the statements and use it most of the time. You got to be careful about that. So use statements on the next page as a starting point. Your hypothesis should be clear and focused on one thing, because that's what you want to do, is test one thing. Your experiment should focus on the hypothesis. Now, you have unlimited funds and unlimited time, because you are not going to do these tests. Just give me tests that could potentially be done in the real world with as much money and time as somebody could have. But keep in mind, your partner's got to be able to look at this and go, okay, if I had unlimited time and unlimited money, could I actually do this? It needs to be clear enough that you could hand it to somebody else and they could run your experiment without going, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? What am I supposed to do here? So you got to keep it clear. But you're only testing one thing, so that shouldn't be that tricky. So make sure your terms are clear. Make sure you've got a control test. If you look at the sheet, there's a spot for your control test. Sometimes what happens is somebody is, they're kind of going through and they get to the control line and they go, I already talked about that up here. I already talked about that up there. And that's okay. If you've already included your control into your study design, just basically show me you know that it's the control. What are you going to count? This is, again, really important. You got to hand this off to somebody, and then you go, let's see how well the plants grow. And they go, that's nice. What the heck am I measuring here? There's like how many different things you could measure to answer the question of how well the plants are growing. So they ought to be able to know what they're going to actually measure to get the results that the test would have if you ran the test in the real world. And it should be very clear. That's one of the trickiest things. Also, don't have them measure something that isn't going to give them any data. Is one of the choices you've got is things that affect people when they go in for jobs. Typically, measuring who gets the job is a very bad measurement, because what if you send 10 people in and none of your people get a job? Is that you want to measure something that maybe is going to happen more often than that, like maybe a callback, or some way to survey the person that's doing the interviewing. Something that's going to give you some numbers to compare. What you're doing as the critiquer is you're going down through the design and seeing, okay, this is definitely off the page of suggested statements. Okay, I understand the hypothesis and it's focused on one thing. Okay, yep, the experiment is good. It tests the hypothesis. I could do this if they gave it to me to do, and I had lots of money and lots of time. Yeah, I think this is a good control for this. Yep, these would give you good results. I understand what would be measured here. So you're kind of checking stuff. Now here's a really important point. If your critiquer finds something that you did really badly, and you want to cross it off and change it, or cross it off and say, see other sheet, and put a different design or a change in the design on another sheet, I am fine with you fixing it. You don't necessarily even have to give it back to the critiquer to have another look at it. But I'd rather you handed it in, well done, than for just me going, well, I'm glad you noticed that, because I noticed that too. There's a point off. You're gonna have your name on 4 designs and your name on 4 critiques. If you do this with just one partner, that's pretty easy. You do your 4, you trade them off. You do your 4 critiques, you trade them back. We have an odd number of people in the room. We are missing one person today. But I will see him probably next week. He's probably going to include himself in next week's lab. So there is potentially an even number. But you can also do it with 3 people. As long as you get your name on 4 designs and get your name on 4 critiques, you can do it with 3 people. It's a pain in the butt for me to correct, but it's doable that way. Questions? As far as lab period goes, you have over an hour to do this if you want to do this here and get it done with. One of the advantages to doing it here is that you can do your designs and throw them in front of me, and I'll look at them and tell you whether I think they're a good design or not. Whereas it's a little trickier for me to do remotely by email than it is to do with the paper in front of me. But if there are no questions, you don't have to stay here for an hour. Up to you. This is due the next time we're in lab. Yes? Yeah, those go, well, that's due today. That goes in the box. Make sure everything's stapled together. Yeah, but don't hand in part 1 for today. When you hand this in, part 1 will be attached to part 2. That way the entire grade isn't predicated on just your design. So there's a stapler right there.
You want this with it?
Is that, you filled out in the back? Yep. Since you're not supposed to come on campus when you're not here, if you have something you want me to look over, like your paper, or you want to hand something in early and you're not going to see me in lecture to do it, on Thursday nights, my fencing club in Amsterdam is active. It's on Route 30, just north of Amsterdam. It's up above Lowe's a little bit, in a little strip mall. The Swords and Strategies Fencing Club, big sign right up on top of the building. And we are there on Thursday evenings from 7 to at least 8, sometimes 7 to 9. If you want to bring something by, I will warn you that my club at the moment is inside its own bubble, so the people in there are not wearing masks, but we're all non-contagious. And my family and veterinarian's family mostly. So if you find that troubling, you can just come and knock on the door and run the exchange through the door rather than come in. But it is another way to get stuff to me outside of our regular lab time. Now, the very last thing I want you to do before you do leave the room is take the paint bottle and just spritz the part of the table that you're working on. You don't even need to wipe it up, but before you leave the room, clean your area there.